Radio. We interrupt this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Damn straight. That is what we are doing here. We are bringing you some political commentary. My name is Samuel Trapp. Glad to have you. If you wish to call the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Arts Studio, you may do so at 573-746-8020, or you can send me an email. I might even pay attention to it live at damnradio.com. And my own email is samuelt@internationalflavor.com. You can try that one too. And I wanted to start today by talking a little bit about sanctions, how they work, why they work, where they work, if they work. And I would argue that they do not, because here we are on, I like the word, I don't know why, I don't understand why they call it if this is a package of sanctions. The EU is now sending out the 19th packet of sanctions against Russia. And they keep on getting, worse and worse. This is how we're going to, what are we going to do? We're going to bring Russia to their knees if you are the EU. Lots of news today. We'll get into some of that as well. And anything you bring up to me, I would be happy to chat if you would like to. Not a problem over here. So let's get started on this article I discovered a few days ago about, and we just finished the 18th packet of sanctions, and then we had the Trump punitive tariffs against India and China, which we've already talked about somewhat at length. And there's, I thought that with these 19 packets of sanctions that we could talk about and see if they're actually working or if they're harming us. So France and Germany are pushing for deeper sanctions against Russia. They think this is what will stop the rest of the world, stop China, stop India, stop Russia from doing well. And I was watching something a little bit earlier, and I got to tell you, this just isn't working. And there are small indications of how it works. And if it was working, Russia's economy would be tanking, but it isn't. What everybody is saying is that it is, heating up, in fact. There's news from the front. I'm not sure I'm going to go into any war news today. I'm not all that jazzed up about it. But I do want to, so we're going to float around a little bit today, most likely. So I wanted to share with you some of this article on this sanctions, because the European Union is thinking this is the way they want to go. They want to go after anyone who is using Russia's domestic alternative to the SWIFT system. So back a number of years ago, 2014, I think. Well, we might get to the number. I have a chart I'll go look into later on in the show. Russia put up their own change system, and right after that, China did the same. And so what I speak about here fairly often is alternatives that people are trying to generate for payment structure, because the rest of the world is tired of us. Tired of our deep state, tired of our people forcing them to engage in sanctions that they may not want to. The latest are China and India that I'm not sure this is going to go the way the old Trumpster wants. There was an interesting article I read also on the chip, which I might share with you a little bit, the chip wars that have been going on between China and the U.S. And there's like a 4-day negotiation. I think it's still going on right now, I may talk to you a little bit about that and where we go with these chip things. But we seem to be, well, America seems to be backing off on some of these. Trump seems to be backing off. And maybe it's because the sanctions really don't work. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about the pressure on the EU to come up with a way, and the pressure is allegedly coming from Trump's office, to force Euroclear. It's a Brussels banking structure that is holding the 200 of the 300 billion in Russian assets, to get them to seize this money. And whether that will work, my quick answer is no, and I will explain to you why. Work to stop the war, I mean. It might prolong it a little bit, which isn't going to do anybody any good, but Russia's already destroyed Western weaponry far more than anybody ever thought would be possible. They've taken most of the other countries, like there was a story last week about Poland putting all of their patriots, moving them to the border because of this nonsensical alleged attack without warheads into Russia. There's been a lot of discussion about that, and I read you Nebenzia. I can't remember where that stress is on his name. It's either Nebenzia or Nebenzia, and I can't remember. But either way, Vasily is his first name, and so let's just use that. But he said that they only have a range of 700 kilometers, so they couldn't have made it to Poland from where they were, if Russia was sending them. And he said there were plenty of occasions in the past where Ukraine has made these sort of false flag things and sent their own versions, their own weaponry, because they have some Giron drones too. And on top of that, the fact that there are no warheads was a pretty big deal. So I don't think Ukraine's going to get a whole lot more joy out of the Patriot systems and stuff like that the Ukraine is on. So I'm not sure that these sanctions are doing to Russia the damage that everybody wishes they were doing. And I want to go into that and tell you why. So remember, Russia's got its own payment system that it's put out in like 2014 or something. China put one out a little bit off of that, and the China one is growing much faster than the Russia one. And I talked about it a little bit with this Shanghai Cooperation Organization being so visible last week, when all of the countries that were there were some 20 countries there well represented that were there last year, and this year's BRICS conferences had so many people, and all of them are seeking alternatives to Western-dominated structures, especially banking. They want to make their own sovereign decisions. They want to do that, and that means that my thesis is that the push to force by Europe, starting with Europe, but if Trump tries to back it, and if Trump takes the money, so two different steps. One is seizure of other people's money, which is a huge deal all in itself, and the other ones are these constant packages. If sanctions were working, we wouldn't need 19 packages from Europe alone, would we? There was a story I read about Lindsey Graham cruising around trying to come up with another one, and Johnson saying he wasn't going to let it be added to a package, legal bill, a bill moving forward, and he wasn't going to let Lindsey Graham attach this more sanctions to this bill. He was going to keep them out. So I think people might be getting the idea that sanctions don't really work, or that even if they put them into place, they aren't going to give you the result that you want. And so that's kind of the nature of where we're going today. And this system is pretty alternative, but France and Germany are trying to hit Russia's trading partners now. So now they're banking, they're not trying to hit the system for transfer of financial messages. This is, instead of SWIFT, they want to attack those, and they say this ensures that Russia won't be able to, if you attack these messages and then you attack all these secondary systems that are going through China and elsewhere, then Russia can't transfer money. So seems like every few months they change what they need to do in order to hit Russia's financial system, or its sales and production system, or target people who want to buy Russian products, or target individual Russians that happen to have money, and make everybody, the attempt to do that is to get everybody to hate the old Vladimir Vladimirovich. But whatever has been happening, it's not been working. So in June of 2024, Brussels banned EU banks operating outside of Russia from connecting to Russia's SPFS or carrying out, you know what? They were trying to stop people from, they wouldn't let them attach to SWIFT's SPFS. And there's two of them. Well, there's actually three, but there's the SPFS that attaches to SWIFT and transferring the system, and they want to exclude from Europe's financial networks anybody trading. But as of early 2025, 177 foreign entities across 24 countries have been connected to SPFS, according to Russian central bank. And so Moscow is, and all these other countries, the more you tell them no, that you can't deal with these, the more they find ways to avoid SWIFT. And so they are attaching to Russia's SPFS. And then they're attaching even more so to China's CIPS, Chinese, I'll get to the acronym in a minute, but basically it's China's version of SWIFT. Russia's is a messaging, your electronic messaging, which is part of the system as well. And they're linking together and growing. So I want to get to these systems that we have. So SWIFT was was launched in 1977. Okay, right now, there are about, as of 2025, 11,000 institutions and 200 countries are attached to SWIFT. And they do 42 million messages a day in electronics, okay, or transfer interests. Here we have this, and they have multi-currency, and it is global, okay? Then, and SWIFT was absolutely the big player, okay? And SPFS, the Russian version, is small but crucial, and it's got 52 users in foreign users, in 2022 to 177 in 2025. And Russia is the anchor that plugs into the CIPS, the Chinese version. And the Chinese version is experiencing explosive growth. So Russia started SPFS first in 2014 and 15, and then CIPS, the Chinese system, started in 2015. And so that one is now, the Chinese version has 176 direct and 1,531 indirect. So there are about 1,700 totals, 100 countries, 4,900 institutions. So they're about half the size of SWIFT. And SWIFT came around in 1977. So what does that get you? 50 years-ish. And in 10 years, the Chinese system is about half the size, okay? Right now, they're only doing about 26,000 transactions a day, but they're up to 175 trillion for 2024 in equivalent dollars, Chinese dollars versus U.S., right? And they are expanding quickly. And now, the fact is that since about 2019, 2020, the SWIFT system has been basically the same. You know, it's not expanding, it's not growing. And they're not expanding with the rest of the world financial markets. So all the growth is going to the CIPS system because they're pretty much staying the same, especially since 2015. And this alternative is creating a pretty big deal for people in the rest of the world to not have to be forced to engage in sanctions. And I admit, my argument that this is that the sanctions and all the things against India and China are not going to work, arguably, could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong at all. I think that the stage was set at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization a week or 10 days ago, I guess, that when they were all together, Xi Jinping, Modi, and Vladimir Putin, that they were all together, and they all were pretty solid on it. I think that Xi Jinping and Putin were encouraging Modi to hold the line. And the statements since that time have been pretty solid that, you cannot tell us, tell a sovereign nation what to do. And more Jai Shankar out there, more Modi out there, everybody parroting the same thing. We're a sovereign nation. And every other nation backing them up and saying, we're a sovereign nation. Are they going to hurt India? Sure. But the oil per barrel we'll get to that in a second, on the amount of oil per barrel is, so let's see here. Messages per day, 53 million for SWIFT, and CIPS started the annual volume and messages per day, number of transactions, 6.6 million in 2023, 8.2 million 2024. The SWIFT equivalent is at 53, okay? And the CIPS over time has gotten quite a bit bigger too. From 2019 to 2025, they've grown pretty large as well. So I struggle to think that this is actually working, that cutting them off on the EU side, that cutting these transactions off is really going to be helpful. I personally don't think they are. And I think that the dollars, the money, the financial transactions just back that up. And so the EU targeting the Russian SWIFT isn't going to go where we think it's going to go. And then, for example, there was an interesting article about China warning the U.S. This one came out today, warning the U.S. about bullying and economic coercion. There's more commentary coming. China condemns the U.S. efforts to pressure G7 and NATO to impose more tariffs or increase tariffs on Beijing over purchases of Russian oil, and say that we will retaliate. China's saying we're going to retaliate if you do. So Trump's out there calling for pressure on Russia's trading partners to stop buying oil, saying that that could help end the Ukraine conflict. But the Financial Times reported that Washington is asking the finance ministers of G7 countries to have 50 to 100% tariffs on Chinese and Indian imports tied to Russian oil. He wants, and remember, Trump said that he will act when the EU acts, and he's encouraging to do this and up them. And then asked on Monday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said it was fully legitimate and lawful for Beijing to maintain normal economic, normal economic trade and energy country cooperation with all countries, including Russia, and that they intend to do so. And then he said that Washington's request was a typical move. Here we are with typical moves by the U.S. Once again, a typical move of unilateralism, bullying, and economic coercion. But facts prove that coercion and pressure win no hearts and minds, and still less do they solve anything, he said. He added that China's position on the Ukraine conflict remains objective and just. And he said the dialogue and negotiation is the only viable solution. He said that Beijing opposes firmly being targeted with illicit unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. I found that pretty interesting, this long-arm jurisdiction. People are tired of being ruled from Washington or told what to do from Washington. And our country has made some dramatic mistakes. If you listened last night to me going through the king of Bosnia and the Kosovo and the Ukraine, this is all very much true. You know, that we have, our country has seriously made a lot of mistakes. But then this was interesting. You don't see this very often. China said that if China's, rights and interests are harmed, it will resolutely take countermeasures to safeguard our own sovereignty, security, and development interests. What are they going to do? How will they counter it? The Financial Times reported that EU officials have begun talks on possible secondary sanctions against China over its purchases of Russian oil and gas, but they want U.S. backing before moving ahead. And, everybody knows that since 2022, Russia has become the major supplier of oil to both China and India. And during his recent trip to Beijing, Vladimir Putin said, he warned the West against speaking to China and India in an unacceptable tone. Don't speak to them like that. They have vast populations, quite true, and strong domestic political systems, also true. So I don't know how this ends, but I don't think it's going to go the way that the U.S. would like it to. Back last week, Washington said, through Trump, said he would mirror any penalties imposed, but he wants them to act first. So Trump is the one who was first saying about all these tariffs and penalties and new packages of sanctions and stuff like that, mostly tariffs in the first place. Then last week late, he said, we're going to wait for the European Union to impose tariffs. And he said that they can impose tariffs of up to 100% on imports of China and Russia. And then he also said some interesting things about sanctioning Russia only if every member of NATO was not buying oil and gas from Russia, as some of them are. So I don't know. I'm encouraged somewhat by some of the things that Donald Trump says. And I'm learning maybe I wasn't paying attention during the first Trump 45 and Trump 47. Maybe I'm catching on that he says a lot of things for effect or for, I don't know what, shock value, or maybe his art of the deal, as several people I know like to say. He's always negotiating. And he doesn't mean anything he says. That's just how businessmen throw out ideas and see what occurs as a result. I think it's kind of a crappy way to do business, but maybe that's why I'm not Donald Trump's. I got no businesses like Donald Trump's. I don't know, but maybe you are always negotiating. I don't know, but he's according to the Financial Times, he made this demand in a recent call meeting with U.S. and EU officials, where they were talking about the economic cost of Ukraine conflict. For Russia anyway. And one U.S. official said that Washington was ready to go right now. But we're only going to do this if our European partners step up with us. The president came on this morning, this was the 9th, and his view is that the obvious approach here is let's all put on dramatic tariffs and keep the tariffs on until the Chinese agree to stop buying Russian oil. The source was quoted. A second official said that the U.S. was prepared to mirror any tariffs imposed by Brussels on Beijing and New Delhi. But Brussels can't really target or tariff Beijing and New Delhi because their trade is so high with China and getting much larger with India as well. So EU officials have already been debating secondary sanctions against China and its energy ports from Moscow, but they stressed that the talks are in the early stage and theirs are dependent upon U.S. support, right? So the U.S. is saying, you do it, and, we'll maybe follow you, looks like. But they're saying, well, we want you to support what we're doing. New Delhi, India, they're pushing back against these demands to reduce reliance on Russian crude. Last month, Trump doubled tariffs on Indian goods, but it didn't do anything. Indian finance minister said the move was unfair, unjustified, unreasonable, and said that New Delhi's oil policy is driven by economic need. And I got to find these numbers of how much oil we're talking about, because since 2022 it has gone up so astronomically that there's no way they could turn it off now. It's way too much. And Beijing also is rejecting Western pressure over its own energy and oil purchases and says, we will ensure our own energy supply because it's in our national interests. And tariff wars have no winners. That's possibly true. Far be it from me to say anything, but it used to be that, open markets were something the West touted all the time. Now, I admit that, and I think that in a lot of ways, Trump is correct, especially with trade deficit things and stuff like that, that if you at least equal tariffs between equal countries on equal goods, right, or the same type of goods, I'm all for that. But, and I think it makes sense, either have a free and open markets all the way around, or figure out why, what you can do to make it even. There may be, let's say it this way. Maybe if you say it that aside from any special needs or provisions, like you can only get a particular item from one particular place in the world, the common similar goods need to have similar treatment cross borders, is what I say. But it never seems to go that way, and it hasn't for years. So Putin cautioned the West against their colonial tone toward Beijing and New Delhi. It's interesting to be listening to the rhetoric that's coming out because it's not like it was before. And I think, here's another quote. Countries like India with 1.5 billion people and China, 1.3 billion people, have powerful economies and live by their own domestic political law, said Putin. Talking to such partners in such a tone of voice is unacceptable. Meaning you can't, I mean, it's pretty obvious what it means, but you can't treat these people like third world countries anymore. And, they shouldn't have to put up with it. And by the way, they aren't anymore. They just aren't. And that is, here's the EU floating your active line via EU is considering penalties on foreign banks using the SPFS. The 19th package, France and Germany pushing the deeper structures, U.S. pushing tariffs. But the fact is, if you punish banks for using SPFS, they're routing around you. They're speeding straight into China's system, which means it's accelerating the exit the U.S. is trying to prevent in the first place. They don't want people to leave SWIFT. They don't want to have created alternative structures. These tariffs are doing the same thing. So these are companions, right? So let's see here. Year-over-year number comparisons. If you watch them just in the last 3 years, I want to find the ones that talk about the number of oil transactions. Because where are we here? Hold on, I got to dig through my notes on this. Because I want to get to the amount that it has grown just in 3.5 years since the war started, right? And get out of these projections. I have too many notes in this. Doop-de-doop-doop-doo. I'm going to keep on going. I wanted to talk to you about all these packages, and there's 19 of them. So I want to get around them for just a second until we get... Okay, Russia sold oil for... I had two propositions here that I leveled to you at the beginning. If somebody wants money, if somebody has trade, and you have two parties that want to make a trade, they will find a way to get the money to each other. So knocking somebody out of the SWIFT system and saying you can't use SWIFT, they're going to do it. I thought this when it started happening back in 2015, 2016. I thought it the same when in 2022 it escalated to the way it went up. And I still believe it today. And how do you not believe this? If I have a deal that I want to make with me and a friend, but the only way I can do that is give money to this bank, and this bank gives the money back to that bank, but the bank says they're not going to do it. Don't I go around that bank and go to somewhere else to make sure the same transaction still takes place? Or maybe I say, all right, then don't give me money, give me goods instead. Let's barter. So that's been happening, and they've created alternative structures. So every time we impose a new sanction or a new limitation, Iran, Russia, China, India, everybody that is stuck in these systems where they don't want to be told what to do and who they can trade with, they're coming up with alternative ways to get the trade conducted anyway, to avoid the sanction, to avoid the fact that you can't use this banking system. We'll get around the banking system. And it's clear that the transactions are still occurring. I mean, we're 19 packages in, right? And I still want to go through those because it's pretty comical to go through all of these packages and say, did this one work? Did this one work? And so point one is, if somebody wants to make money, they're always going to find a way to get it. And, if they want to make a trade. And the second one anybody who has teenagers knows this. Okay. This is true. This is like an immutable truth of youth and of sovereign countries. If you tell someone you can't do this without some sort of fair basis or convincing or working together, they'll defy you out of principle and out of pride. Now, now your kids are doing it because they're feeling their adulthood. They're feeling that they get to make their own decisions. Well, as countries grow up, as countries become more familiar with the world, more familiar with trade, they want that sovereign. We've discussed this repeatedly, that our system has always been to tell countries what they are going to do. And we've done it, I'm not involved in that, but our country has done it forever, for centuries. People have colonialized other places and told them what they will do. And now I've not done that. I don't want to tell people what to do. I don't agree with that sort of behavior. I think if you want to do something, unless it's illegal, immoral, unethical, and even if it is, there are penalties for it. You figure out the penalties. But so my two immutable truths are, one, if somebody wants to earn money, they're going to find a way to get it. If they have a trade, and especially if you're in, and then number two, you tell somebody no, they're instant, that they cannot do something without real justification or a justification they disagree with, they're going to do it anyway. And so it's not just philosophical here. It's borne out by history, economics, psychology. This is how people think, right? So let's take my first reality, that money always finds a way. You find your way to get the money. Money's going to happen. Here's the reality. Energy sanctions. This is what we've been energy sanctioning forever. We were told nobody can have the money. So initially, Russia sold oil through India and China. And India and China often just relabeled the cargo and sold it to the original people that were buying it anyway in Europe. This is why Europe can't sanction China and India, because that's where they're getting a lot of their oil anyway, oil products anyway, and gas. And remember, these pipelines that I told you about before that are going into China, and the one that they just approved to go through Mongolia too, these are huge deals, and they were finished during this time period. So part of it was natural anyway. And China and India can't do without any of this stuff. So what are they going to do? Turn it off? I don't think so. They can't. Why would they? And they aren't going to buy it from the U.S. for quite a bit more. It's just not going to happen. And it doesn't work for them financially, economically, and profit-wise. So what about technology bans? Russia's been banned from having technology. Russia turned to parallel import structure through Turkey and the Gulf. Same chips, intermediaries. They're getting them from intermediaries. Frozen assets, and I want to do a separate little bit about that, these frozen assets. The profits have been skimmed. Now, that's wrong, but okay. They're trying to justify. Now, Trump's trying to convince Brussels to steal the whole corpus of the money, the asset itself, and not just skim the profits off, because they've skimmed off $9 billion and sent it over to Ukraine already. So, but profits have been skimmed, but Russia and the partners are now building alternative financial structures, and more importantly, other people in the world are looking at this, and what have we seen? we have seen a huge increase in the purchase of hard assets. Gold, that is astronomical what's been going on with foreign countries buying gold and holding their reserves in gold and not putting money in Western structures. That's already cost them, because the rest of the world sits and looks at this and go, geez, if they could freeze our assets, they can freeze everybody's. Here I am in Saudi Arabia. I don't think I'm going to park my money there. I'm going to buy another pallet of gold and put it in my underground fortress below my palace. That's what I'm going to do, because I'll be damned if the West is going to take my money when this happens. And so that's a natural effect. You can't deny that is happening, because it is. There are all kinds of reports about gold, silver, any other structures, platinum. People are buying in huge quantities, governments buying it, and less is being kept in these structures, and people are having alternative structures. You can't get away from SWIFT right now, but that doesn't mean you can't build an alternative. And so people are going to these new systems, and they're not going to take the U.S. telling them no. So the faster Europe and the U.S. tries to say, you can't access these systems, you can't, the more they are. And so that's reality number one. Money will find its own way. And then the second one, the reality number two, is when you're told you're not. If you tell India it cannot buy discounted Russian oil, what has it done? It has doubled down and said, you know what? Don't tell me what I can and cannot do. If only to show that you can't dictate to me that this is, it doesn't, what other reason can they be doing it for? Tell Russia it cannot access SWIFT, which it did in 2014 after Crimea. We'll fix you. We'll knock you out of the financial structure. They built their own, and they plugged into the Chinese one after the Chinese built it. Moving along smartly, they just keep on going. Tell China it cannot grow an RMB clearing facility, the transactional conversations daily. It accelerates its own financial structure and gets 5,000 banks connected. 5,000. The act of prohibition just is accelerating the exact outcome that the West is trying to prevent. They don't want these new structures because long term they damage the globalists. They damage the ability of us to tell the West to tell the rest of the world what they will do. So, it's not an agenda driven, it's cause and effect. This is simple. Nobody cares about the Western agenda anymore. They care about cause and effect. Tell me I can't, I will, and tell me the financial system is no longer available, I'll build my own. We'll figure it out. Money finds a way, right? So, I do want to get into the sanctions for sure when we get there, but the reality of life is if Russia wants to sell oil, I'll find some way to pay for it. If Europe closed the door to Russian gas, India and China open the window. That's how it works. So let's talk a tiny bit about this timeline, because the timeline of both the sanctions and the frozen assets are pretty similar, okay? They unfolded over the same trajectory. So Crimea, between 2014 and 2017, there were sanctions. And then while Brussels was packaging more sanctions, 1 through 18 came from 2014 to 2017. 1 Well, you know what? I'll get to the list later. Who cares when they come out? But we'll get to that in just a second. It was also freezing and skimming money from the Russians. So the two stories are really one story: coercion through finance, and they both are having the same result. Russia is building new systems, China's building alternatives, and the partners, including India, are rebelling against all this. They don't want to hear it anymore. So what is my basis to believe in this? First of all, economics. Look at economics. Economic studies show that sanctions do not achieve the political objectives they claim to, but almost always trigger trade, diversion, and circumvention. You can read these in IMF papers on the Russian sanctions today. And I read a couple of those and went through them. They say the same thing. This is International Monetary Fund saying sanctions don't work. Historic. Think about this. There was a U.S. embargo on Cuba in the 60s, right, and all the way through the present. And so what has happened? Has Havana collapsed? You could argue that Havana hasn't developed as fast as it should have, but it didn't collapse. It turned to the Venezuela recently, and before that, the USSR. And they didn't collapse. That wasn't the end. Iran, sanctions. I watched something that Iran is just unbelievably booming, especially in education right now. And engineers. I was shocked by that Iran is like number 4 in the world as far as number of engineers that they're churning out. Their education system is extremely capable. Iran sanctions, so smuggling, barter. They joined the yuan clearing, and it's the money is finding a way. They're still, they're partners with China. Remember me going through all the stories about the rail and port initiatives going through Iran, and Russia finalizing the last leg of that alternative rail system and delivery system to avoid the Suez Canal. That's all out there. Rhodesia, 1960s, same deal. Oil keeps flowing through South Africa. So basically, in psychology, they call this the reactance theory. People respond to restrictions by asserting their own freedom, just like a teenager, and you can scale it up to nations too. So I don't know. I think that if they can take Russia's reserves, they can take yours. I think that resonates around the globe. First they freeze the assets. Then they skim the profits off the assets. Now they talk of taking the principal and Trump's trying to talk them into doing it, thinking that'll end the war. It won't, but that's the argument. Law is being rewritten. Trump said, rewrite your laws, pick something different so that we can, take their money. Let's take Russia's money. That's a mistake. It's time we tell it straight. They're teaching the world that rules-based, and this has been going on for a long time, but these same people that we've been allowing to deep state our own country have been trying to deep state the world. And now that everybody knows that it's, a lot of the things that they're doing are a lot more visible, that they rewrite the law every time we turn around, and that this rules-based means the old rules for you, but not for me. And so you can trace this from anywhere, China, India, the whole global south, and why pushing it too far is going to break your own system eventually. And that's what I believe. So let's talk about this sanctions packages, because I did want to get to these key failures. The energy sanctions, they failed. Export control bans, Turkey, UAE, all didn't work. Humanitarian soft sanctions that really didn't get anywhere. Here's a quote for you. A guy named Dmitry Nekrasov said, sanctions against Russia, he's an economist, sanctions against Russia were doomed to fail. Some of them have even boosted the Russian economy. And there's another article that came out. The article's Down But Not Out, the Russian economy under Western sanctions. This came out a little bit ago, a couple of months ago. Russia has adjusted, sheltered itself with real allies, and traded aggressively eastward. Sanctions compressed briefly, but did not collapse. Russia means. And so, I don't know what more you need to say that they're just not working. I wanted to talk a little bit about the profits versus the corpus debate and their legal justifications. First of all, I don't think they have even the legal justification to take the profits, because they've sent over $9 billion to Ukraine from Russia's profits seized in Brussels because they were forced to take it. So in the West, here's Janet Yellen. You remember her? She said, there's no sense at all that it would be called theft. She said, people were saying you can't steal another country's money and give it to Ukraine. And she said, well, there's no sense in that argument. The assets remain in institutions where they generate income, and Russia cannot claim the income right now. So she was saying that to justify taking just the profits, which they've been doing for a couple of years now. And she also vows that new sanctions to catch escape routes for Russian money will hamper Russia's ability to backfill any losses that they're getting from the income, or that they would have been getting on the income from these assets. And Jai Shankar from India had something very interesting to say about that the other day when they were telling him that these sanctions, they're questioning him again on these sanctions and why are you buying from Russia? And he says, listen, we buy from who we like to buy from. His quote from Times of India was, if you don't like it, you don't buy it. But India defends its purchases as stabilizing its own energy market, and constantly and continually is accusing the West of double standards. And frankly, I agree. So it's a pretty thin legal basis to take Russia's money, and everybody you ask about that in the political circles are, and in fact, even this bank, this Euroclear, is saying, man, we really can't take this money. We can't do it. But that doesn't mean they won't, especially now with Trump trying to get them to take it. Let's see. Let's come up with some foolish commentary, what I like to call it, from our own elite class over here, those who are so hell-bent on taking Russia's money and assets and sanctions and creating something new to change the trajectory, that they come up with these foolish commentaries. Ready? Here's Scott Bessent, and that guy's a genius, say that facetiously. Here's him about his threats of secondary tariffs on India and China and pressure on foreign banks tied to SPFS. And Janet Yellen says, our collective efforts have cut Russia off, right? This was in 2023 in May, she said this. Our collective efforts have cut Russia off from key inputs, drastically limiting revenue. But she's completely wrong in that. Their revenue and their GDP went up 3.8% during a period when the rest of Europe's, there were a lot of people on the decline. And she continues, we will not be indifferent to those who undermine sanctions, she says. And here's von der Leyen from European Commission. She says she's backing the loans and profit schemes, to Ukraine. She says she calls them reparations. So she gets to unilaterally just declare reparations are necessary to compensate Ukraine and punish Russia's aggression. She said that in a recent speech. Typical statements are like this: sanctions must be enforced. All countries must be part of the burden. We cannot allow Russia to circumvent. It's always Russia, Russia, Russia. And critics and global voices. Here's a guy named Frederick Lasser, head of research at a company called Gunver, a think tank. It says, unless sanctions target the actual buyers, like China and India, sanctions remain largely symbolic. That was reported in Reuters. Here, this Russian guy, Nekrasov, that I told you about, he said it's absurd and disconnected to think that sanctions will work. Many of them bolster Russia's resilience. Indian press and public analysts, the West sets new rules on the fly. India will do what protects its people and its energy security. I have wanted to get into the projections of what happens if they do what Trump is encouraging in the EU and take Russia's $300 billion. I think that there's going to be a military effect. I think there will be a global trust effect and a financial effect. And then philosophically, it folds right back into what I was saying before. So let's start with, if they take the money, I think that you then, because it's already predicted that this Chinese system is going to overtake the SWIFT system, this in especially in Asia and Eurasia, by 2030 or 31 at the base year. If it goes faster, which means if they speed it up by stealing money from Russia and handing it over to Ukraine, I think you're going to see an exodus even quicker. And more people are going to run to the Chinese system. That's what I think. And the predictions that they say is that it would then speed up by a couple of years, like 2027, 2028. So if somebody steals $300 billion of a country's money and hands it to another country, which Trump is trying to convince Brussels to do, I think it speeds up the exit from SWIFT. That's what I think. Or not exit, but the alternative structure grows faster, and it's already slated to overtake SWIFT by 2030, 31. So I think that would just speed it up. The military effect, I think that Ukraine would get a short-term bump. A little more money, buy some more weapons, maybe attract some more, I don't know what, mercenaries. They don't have any people left. And, they still, makes me wonder a little bit, because they still haven't lowered their age any further from the 25, like the West keeps encouraging them to do, to lower the age to 18, like everywhere else. And they still haven't done that. But they, if the money is seized and given to Ukraine, this $300 billion, that will get a bump for Ukraine. But Ukraine can't get enough people. The money will just be stolen like it always is. Corruption abounds. It's everywhere. But Russia's war economy has already shifted heavily toward its home supply lines. Everything they get, they're learning. Right now, they are perhaps the most independent country with its own. They get all their not all, but the vast majority of their own raw materials are available inside their own country. And so they've looked inward. Their nationalist tendency, which has always been around, is now extremely strong. There are examples. What did they do when McDonald's left? What did they do when Pepsi left? What did they do when I don't know, Starbucks left? They ended up with different things, and they created their own. And now some of these places are wanting to come back, and they're not letting them. You know, there was indication that McDonald's want to come back. They're like, no, screw you now. We're vkusna tochka. You know, we're tasty, period. And we're going to stay that way. So I think that the creation of alternative effects has harmed the rest of the world and the corporations that left much more than they harmed Russia. And so I'm very concerned that if they do take this money, that there will be if it hasn't occurred already, a global trust collapse. And I think that's possible. You know, if they take $300 billion from Russia and hand it to Ukraine, other central banks around the world are going to say, if principle is unsafe, we have to put our reserves somewhere else. We already know about the gold hoarding. We already know that people are avoiding the Western exchange systems and settlement systems. And we already know that philosophy is going to make people exit as well. And right now there's a ton of pushback on these efforts as well. India. Jai Shankar speaks of red lines. India's continuous import of Russian crude and argues that energy security and stable markets are far more important than honoring sanctions on behalf of the U.S. For, you know, they have been pretty standard responses on their take on the Ukraine war. It's something that they don't blame Russia. Most of the rest of the world take a kind of a neutral position on that, knowing what everybody else knows. This is a proxy war for the West and the U.S., and it never should have happened. By the way, if Trump was still saying, you know what I haven't heard him say lately? That's Joe Biden's war. That's not my war. And, you know, he had the opportunity. He still has it. If he eased out, war'd be over pretty damn soon still. I was watching a lot of the videos that Russia is still gaining on the ground at a pretty steady rate, and that Syrskyi has moved most of his troops to the Pokrovsk region, and they've actually had a little bit of a counteroffensive down there. The Russian side is saying that, yeah, they've had some, but it's really cost them in lives, which is probably true. But where it's cost them more is in the gains by Russia in the other areas, because they sucked all the units away from these other parts of the front and put them all in Pokrovsk, so because they don't want to lose that. But what has that done? It has made Russia jump over on the into Zaporizhia. I'm sorry, Dnepropetrovsk from Zaporizhia, and a couple other places as well. And on the northern front, they're advancing. In the central front, they're advancing, but in Pokrovsk, it's they're slogging it out. And there's even been talk that says that they talked about Pokrovsk on purpose to get Syrskyi to move his men to counterattack right there, because they knew that politically it's a very, they don't want to lose that city. You know, it makes it horror story for the rest of Ukraine that they lose Pokrovsk. And so they encouraged him to come there. Meanwhile, Russia's attacking all up and down the front lines in other places and holding their own in Pokrovsk. But they did that to encourage them to come on, but they're having big gains everywhere else. So I don't know. This trade data that, I was telling you about before I got distracted, India's stance on Jai Shankar and his red lines, but the trade data, Europe imported LNG in record volumes in 2024. And that's what India is complaining about as well. They say, why is it okay for Europe to import LNG in record volumes last year, but we can't import, we're being sanctioned for trade with Russia. And so India's trade with Russia surged in the past couple of years, and in the EU and the US, they criticize India for this, but everybody sees it as hypocrisy. I know I do. If you're importing LNG and buying Indian gas or oil, that came from Russia, and it's okay for them to buy it, but you can't buy it from them directly, but then you buy it from India, that it's kind of hypocrisy, and everybody is saying so. And so that's India's point. India's balancing sanctions, and they want to discuss their strategic autonomy. Well, what are they thinking in Russia and China? We all know. Kremlin says profit skimming is unlawful. It is theft. And they accuse the West of rewriting international law. We talked some about that last night, with the West kind of avoiding international law when it's uncomfortable for them, like it was in Kosovo and the other places we discussed last night. It still upsets me a little bit that I didn't recall all of that and how recent it was. But those are really just the last three that have come up, Kosovo, Ukraine, and now Bosnia. And I'm very much interested in this October 15th. It's only a month plus away. So Russia doesn't want, or says that, stealing, don't steal our money. China's position. Chinese banks are very wary of U.S. sanctions, and Beijing publicly fights back, calling it U.S. and EU overreach, long-arm jurisdiction, and call it unfair competition. You remember when Yellen was warning China about their special relationship with Russia, and said that they couldn't, that she was really worried about it, and China's like, and? You're worried about our relationship with somebody else? What do you care? China says sanctions are unilateral and unfair. They don't really discuss anything with anybody before they just institute sanctions, And I would like to see some different models of what we do, but it just where's the Trump 47 quotes? What has Trump been saying on this? Let's see. Recently, he said the following. In addition to saying that he wanted to steal the money or wanted Brussels to figure it out, here's what he said about sanctions only if NATO stops buying Russian oil. Here is on September 13. The U.S. will do major new sanctions after all NATO members stop buying Russian oil. Now think about that. It was only a couple of weeks ago that he was talking about these sanctions, and he was all Lindsey Graham'd. And now we haven't heard from Lindsey Graham in a little while. Lindsey Graham, I wonder how long it's been since he's been in Kiev. What has Trump said about using tariffs as leverage? He's still a pretty strong tariff dude. And it was the same day as he said this on September 13. He said, tariffs of 50 to 100% on China, because he was linking Chinese purchase of Russian oil to prolonging the war, said that it would be a way to stop Russia from being able to fight the war. Same thing on India. He said, India, that is a big deal because it will cause a rift with India. He said that on his Fox interview excerpt on the 13th as well. And on sanctions posture toward banks and oil that the EU are imposing, here's what he said. He said, we're going to have to come down very, very strong and hit them very hard with sanctions, banks, oil, and tariffs. So putting it all together, his quotes are, what it really sounds like to me, because nothing is ever definite, you with him, this is all kind of an art of the deal, saber rattling threats to press NATO first, then swing tariffs at China and possibly India, but floating asset seizure in G7 talks. Whether this is leverage or self-defeating brinksmanship, it's up to you to decide. I can't figure it out with Trump because he changes his mind so often and he says one thing one day and something else differently. And, so Euroclear says about taking the money that the EU plans to juice returns on frozen Russian asset risks, and they call it expropriation with huge legal liability, according to a Financial Times interview. So these, stealing the money, I don't think it's a good plan. And I don't think they're going to be able to come up with a legal basis to take that money. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. So what do we know about Package 19 other than what they've said about this tariffs against people that deal with Russia buying oil and gas and going after banks that this is EU going after banks? This is their 19th package that we were talking about. Well, they say they're going to defeat Russia, but again, if the 18th package hasn't done anything, what makes us think the 19th is going to do it, right? If Russia's model is dying, if they're winning, why do we need a 19th package? And why do we need the corpus seizure of this $300 billion that's in the bank? And why do we need 100% tariffs on China? After 18 packages, don't you think that I suppose you could rephrase the question to ask it like this. If you input the 19th sanction, is it going to work? Is it guaranteed? Or will we need a 20th package? Because every time we hear, this is the one. This is the one, we got him now. We got him now. I don't feel like we got him now. All these ultimatums, all these comments by Jai Shankar, all this expropriation talk by Euroclear, all the 19 packages, what have we done? We've choked trust in Western systems. That's what we've choked. We haven't choked Russia. If number 47 takes the money, it doesn't end the war. It ends the credibility of Western banking structures and gives another instance where we change the rules, change law after the fact, and apply it to someone as a penalty and justify it. And people are sick of that. Frankly, I'm sick of it. I think that you put rules in place. I think that freezing the money in the first place, I remember having conversations with people about that, whether you can just freeze somebody's stuff because you disagree with what they're doing. Have they done that to everyone? We're still holding money from Iran or something like that from 30, 50 years ago. That money is still being held. So I don't know. Here's some critics. One think tank says Russia's model no longer delivers. Right? Well, another one says seizing profits isn't theft because the principle stays put. Right? And both of these are similar. But even Euroclear calls it expropriation and theft. The profits only exist because Brussels took someone else's money and gave the profit to somebody else. So they wouldn't have gotten the profit if they didn't steal the money. So my thought process is they've stolen the money already. And that is not gonna, it doesn't lend itself to encouraging more people to have trust in the system, right? So what I wanted to do was get into these, kind of give you a history of the sanctions package and each one of them and give a history of them. And I have to find them because these sanctions, where are they? Where they had a whole spreadsheet of them, and I'm having trouble finding them. That they show up. Come on, give them up. So here we go. Package 1. So here we go. 2014, 2015, during Crimea. Packages 1 through 18. And they started with package 1, which were travel bans. There were people saying no Russians can have Schengen visas, and the Schengen visa is the one that allows you, so when you come into Europe and you come into France, that means you can freely cross the border with another country. You don't have to transfer. Well, that's because they opened the borders long ago. And remember, if maybe military people knew this that have been over there for a bunch of time, I did this, and you could come into one country and you're not stopped at the border of France, between France and Germany, or France and any other country. It's Spain or anything. And so a Schengen basically gives you a visa to come into any European country and continue on into any of the rest with only having the one visa, right? And they were trying to say in package 1 that Russians weren't allowed to have any. I believe that one is mostly gone. I was reading an article on that one the other day. And then they froze assets of officials, of governmental officials that were located outside of Russia. That was 2014, 2015. And in the same year, they had restrictions on Crimea trade. So Crimea couldn't trade with other people. That was package number 2. Package number 3, they put ban on arms and military goods. So you couldn't buy or sell from Russia. And none of these things meant that Russia gave back, the Crimea. It didn't work. Package 4, they had to ban on capital market access for certain Russian banks. I think the last one they had touched was the Gazprom Bank in 2023. They took that one, but we'll get to that in a minute. And so those were the first sets which came out in 2015. And they also engaged in, restrictions on offshore energy technology, some asset freezing that weren't necessarily any packages of sanctions, but they were restricting the same or expanding the first 4 up above. So in 2022, we had the flood of new sanctions. There was a flood of them. Okay, first, package 5 was an embargo on coal. That was going to take care of them. That was going to fix them up. It didn't, but that's what the speech was. Coal embargo. Package number 6, 2022 also. Oil embargo, right? They've been fighting about this, since 2022 and onward. Package number 7, SWIFT ban on major Russian banks, all the rest of them. Well, except Gazprom, that didn't get done until 2024. And then package 8, more luxury goods. They were banning things like fashion clothing. They were banning, I don't know what, gold and stuff like that. And packages 9 through 18. Here we go, a whole list. Machine tools. So Russia couldn't import or sell any machine tools, but they still sell to a lot of their colleagues. Aviation parts. You heard me talk last week about Belarus having that sanctions lifted because they have some Western plane. And so Belarus can now get aviation parts. Dual-use technology, and I looked that up, but I can't remember what it is. But it has something to do with computers and stuff like that. But it was also semiconductors were limited in one of the packages, 9 through 18. And then industrial components were also sanctioned or blacklisted. And then, more importantly, and they started targeting individuals through this package 9 through 18. More than 1,500 individuals in Russia have been sanctioned, including people from whole sectors that were people like, remember, they sanctioned a lot of the people who broadcast radio or talk bad about the war, the West, anything like that, like Solovyov and Maria Zakharova, any of these foreign ministers, they're all blacklisted. But there's a lot of public officials that are too. But yet, what has been the result of all of these sanctions over that time? So we've been sanctioning the hell out of them since 2014, 11 years. And what's the result? The IMF reported that Russian GDP grew 3.6% in 2023. We haven't seen the reports for 2024 yet, but it was expected to be a similar number. But in 2023, it was stronger than Germany, stronger than the UK, stronger than France. Their internal inflation came down in Russia, but it was going up everywhere else. Factories adapted to internal markets, got all their stuff. They substituted imports. Exports are rerouted. And, a lot of economists, including that one I told you about earlier, that Nekrasov, they said that sanctions are doomed to fail. I believe that from myself, just from the very beginning. I was like, I'm not so sure that this is going to work, and obviously it hasn't. And so here we are on package 19. This one was just, we just had package 18 about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks, but 18 was only finished up a month ago. And so, and this is mainly being pushed by France and Germany, as I said, and they want to sanction foreign banks. As I said throughout this entire show, that's not going to work. And you're active, the organization that works with Euroclear, measures should strike at the deep structure of Russia's financial and logistics network. But, my rules from above, people are going to be defiant if you tell them no. The more you tell India you can't, the more India says, watch me do what I want to do. The more you punish neutral banks, the more they plug into China's CIPS. So every package builds the very thing that they're trying to avoid, and it helps Russia. So I don't think you're your 19 packages are going to work. As far as the seizure of frozen assets, as I said, legal thin ice. Do you remember when they had tried to justify this back a couple of years ago? Do you remember that? It was back in mid-2022, early 2023. I can't remember. But they had a UN General Assembly trying to pass a resolution to create a kind of a register of damage, right? They wanted Ukraine to be able to report all of the damage so that they could take Russia's money and use it for what they call reparations. But it's only a resolution. So by the UN General Assembly, those are not binding. Only the UN Security Council could really authorize the seizure of this money, right? That's why, well, we'll get to that in a second, but Russia and China, they sit on this UN Security Council and have veto power. So that's not going to work. So Brussels created its own regulation, and since Euroclear is in Brussels, forced Euroclear to comply to give the 9 million. So just like we talked about last night, if the UN doesn't like the fact that Russia and China can veto what they've done, they create a way to get around it. The West, what do? We recognize new countries, or we recognize independence, and therefore kind of get around it, like the king that was appointed for the discussion last night, my king's discussion. And so Brussels has created its own internal Brussels-only rule and forced it upon Euroclear, which is located there. And so refusal of Euroclear to do what they say could mean internal fines, lost their own license, lawsuit. So it's not really European law, and it's definitely not UN Security Council. It's just forcing one internal bank nationally to do the same thing. So now Washington is trying to go further. Bloomberg says that the Treasury is pressuring G7 to come up with a pathway to take this money. And so far, they haven't been able to do it. Trump is saying, that we're going to hit very hard, we're going to do sanctions, and we're going to take this all out as leverage. I'm not sure what works. I'm sure what not works. What doesn't work, nothing has worked so far. Nothing has come of any of these things. 19 sanctions packages, no decisive impact. Frozen assets, everybody's calling it thefts. Alternatives, SPFS and CIPS, they're accelerating. The rules of life, everybody knows what they prove stronger than sanctions. Money finds a way, don't tell me no, I'll go around you. The West is risking permanent loss of credibility. The sanctions might be a short-term tool, but long-term they fail. What are we going to do? You can't control what you can't restrain. The more West pushes, the faster the exit accelerates. And I think they just fail outright. And there's not much that anybody can do about that. So this has been International Flavor, where the truth just tastes better. I'm very glad you've been here. Hope you continue to join me nightly at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you can listen to the shows at your own convenience on internationalflavor.com. And you can also listen to them at damradio.com/podcast. You can also get all the excellent commentary of our other talk show hosts. And JR has great music on here during the time when nobody is opining on interesting news from around the world or from the United States and even from the state of Missouri. So tune in to damradio.com as often as possible because we like it when you do. I appreciate you very much. Have a very good night.